But first, today at the National Press Club, we all got a glimpse of what a Labor Green government's going to look like. Much heavier taxes, political correctness on steroids, and a swift wind down of the industries that make our country prosperous and help pay for all the essential services we demand out of the budget. Here's the Greens leader, Adam Bandt.
It's time to make the big corporations and billionaires pay their fair share of tax. Today, I can announce the first of these Robin Hood reforms. We're calling it a big corporations tax. It will apply to companies with an annual turnover of over $100 million, taxing the excess profits that these companies make. There are at least 5 new seats across the country where we believe we're in with a strong chance. We'll continue to push to stop the opening of new coal and gas mines.
I wonder how many people vote for the Greens but actually know what the party stands for, because it's a far cry from wanting to keep old growth forests and stop pristine rivers being dammed and preserve old buildings. It's not conservationism anymore, if it ever was. It's economic upheaval, cultural revolution. If the Greens had their way, we wouldn't eat meat, we wouldn't drive cars, we wouldn't fly in aeroplanes, because all of that's supposedly destroying the planet. They probably would, but we wouldn't. There'd be no mines, no factories, no big farms, because they're all exploitative capitalism. And there'd be no mum, dad and the kids sort of families, because that's the heteronormative patriarchy. About the only thing we'd ever get built under the Greens would be more so-called safe injecting rooms for drug addicts. But not only are they economic wreckers, they're about the loudest hypocrites going around. Today, Greens MP Max Chandler-Mather was under fire after appearing on stage at yesterday's CFMEU rally in Brisbane, with protesters holding signs comparing Anthony Albanese to a Nazi. A few years back, when as opposition leader, Tony Abbott stood on a stage to speak at a carbon tax rally in Canberra, the Greens demanded he resign and apologise, all that sort of stuff, when someone in the crowd held up a Ditch the Witch placard crudely aimed at then Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Now, neither man can be held responsible for the sort of signs that someone in a crowd might hold up, but I didn't see calls today for Chandler-Mather to resign, like was demanded of Abbott. But that's the Greens, one rule for them and another for the rest of us. The crazy thing is that there are lots of people inside Labor branches and Labor MPs too, whose differences with the Greens are too slight to even notice. That's why Labor will never put the Greens last on their how to votes, even though the Greens are a deadly threat to our economy, our security and our society, because the Greens are basically the inner city branches of the Labor Party. And with the primary vote in the low 30s, without Greens preferences, Labor would be in almost permanent opposition, because it routinely falls about 10 percentage points behind the coalition. Today, Bandt spelt out the minimum demands for the Greens as a price for supporting Labor in minority government, which is the next election's most likely outcome. Turning the screws on the Prime Minister, reminding him that without the Greens, Albanese is done for. Here's just a few of their asks. $120 billion in higher taxes over the forward estimates, another $500 billion or more in taxes over the decade. Bigger company tax, 40% on company profits, a much higher tax on mining projects, higher taxes still on fossil fuel projects, which the Greens want to see ended as soon as possible, even though coal and gas provide us with $200 billion a year in export revenues. Today, Labor figures were dismissing this all as some sort of ambit claim, declaring there would be no deals between Labor and the Greens if Albanese was re-elected. Well, seen that movie before. Just like Julia Gillard tried to pretend she wouldn't do a deal to stay in office in 2010, well, here she is. It's like a marriage photo between her and the Greens to bring in a carbon tax, despite declaring this in the election campaign.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
Never forget the wasted years of that hung parliament and the higher taxes, the much higher, largely wasted social spending. All of that will be back if Albanese and Bant join forces. And don't be fooled into thinking Labor could do a better deal with the Gucci teals, because they're basically Greens in better outfits. All of them today even declaring that there should be no new gas projects, even though gas is needed to make renewable energy work. If Labor really is different from the Greens, the Prime Minister would put them last on the ballot paper. But he won't. Watch him, he will not.
The gold mine can go ahead. What has happened is a decision based upon a tailings dam. Chris Minns would like it to go ahead. I'd like it to go ahead too. There's nothing to stop it. There were other options that the company put forward on the tailings dam.
We need the gold mine. We're not going to get the gold mine. This is the problem with the Greens. It's a problem with Labor. They're not straight with us. They will not put the Greens last. And if there is a hung parliament, God help Australia.